Well, everybody, can I welcome to the Digital Dialogue, Director of the Museum of Contemporary Art, one of the great artistic icons, both the building and its director of this city, and importantly, someone who has been a wonderful patron for artists across Western Sydney as well. The wonderful Ann Macgregor, welcome.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be able to talk to you today.
Well, I want to talk to you about art, Western Sydney in the age of Corona. As I said in the introduction, you've been a wonderful patron for so many artists across our region. Sitting as you do magnificently, the building on the shores of Sydney Harbour and very much Eastern Harbour City, unlike maybe some of the inner city arts community, you've really made it your business to reach out and work with communities. Just as a starting point, you're running a major institution and the world's in meltdown with pandemic. How are you coping on the business side?
Well, I have to be honest with you, as an organisation that is independent, in other words, we only get just over 20% of our funding from government, it's a little scary right now. We were very dependent on our venue hire, taking advantage of this magnificent site, of course. Nobody's getting married right now, not in our venue, and it's very, very difficult for us. But I've just been saying to my team, we've been here nearly 30 years, we've been through difficult times. I came when we were on the verge of bankruptcy 20 years ago, and we're very agile. I'm most concerned right now that we are able to pivot, if you like, towards what we can do while we're in closed down, but as importantly, what we can look forward to when we reopen. And that means continuing to invest in our fabulous team and the artist educators in particular, many of whom are from Western Sydney, that we set such high store by, and they are really what makes the MCA very special.
We think about, I know they always say the great love songs come from the great heartbreaks of the world. You and I spoke only a few weeks ago at a lunch at your museum about the work you're doing with hosting bushfire artists and being part of that recovery. We didn't know this one was coming. Do you think out of, and is there any evidence globally that out of this great crisis, great creativity is coming? Not only rock stars at home singing songs to the world, but are the artists in physical form picking up the paintbrush, getting out the modelling clay and going for it through this pandemic?
I think the big issue is, to be honest with you, it's about survival. I mean, I'd love to think that artists are continuing to make great artworks, and I'm sure some of them are, but I think we have to acknowledge that artists need the conditions to make art the same as we do. And they are showing great resilience. I've been talking to quite a few of them. I've been looking at them on Instagram. I think we can all be inspired by what the artists are doing. But I don't think we should underestimate the downside of all this, which is actually we're facing an incredible loss of income for workers, creative workers and artists, despite what the federal government has done, which is obviously fantastic and a lot of us will benefit. I worry about artists. They do work in isolation, the uncertainty and what will happen in the future. I think it's a very troubling time for all of us.
While they might be used to isolation, they won't be qualifying mostly for JobKeeper allowances either. So you're right, exactly. the economic damage done to our cultural ranks.
I think it's the uncertainty, Chris. It's artists not knowing. We had a fabulous team of hosts. That's the people who welcome you when you come to the museum, many of whom are artists. And that makes them very special for us because they're able to talk about the work. They're not just there to guard it. And in a time like this when we can't open the doors, we're unable to keep going with them. And the JobKeeper allowance will help some of them, but not all of them. And I think that's my concern at the moment, is how many of our artist educators and our front of house team can we realistically support through what we hope is not going to be too protracted a shutdown.
So what can the rest of us do in our Western Sydney community to try and sustain artistic output during this age of Corona?
Well, I think supporting artists both morally and financially. Follow artists on Instagram. Give them praise, feedback. Anyone in isolation needs that kind of feedback. Liam Benson, for example, who's one of our amazing artist educators from Western Sydney, we're working with him on a number of projects where he can put things digitally that he would normally have been, the kind of classes he would be running can be online. And I think if people can partake in those things through an institution like the MCA, or as I say, just following artists and giving them encouragement. And I know everybody's suffering financially, but we do need financial support. Institutions need it, artists need it, The large institutions like the MCA, right through to the small artist-run initiatives, all need support. And I'm sure local galleries will be doing, I noticed Blacktown had some fantastic creativity packages going up online. So I would urge everybody, when they're looking for things to do, to look up what their artists and institutions are doing locally.
More broadly, once we eventually emerge from the grip of the current crisis, and everybody's talking about, the Prime Minister talks about the other side of the bridge and economic recovery, where does social recovery fit? What role does art going to play? In addition to its economic role, it will also contribute, attendance at galleries, etc., and purchase of art. What role more emotionally is art going to play in a recovery, be it bushfire, be it pandemic, that social dimension, creative amenity that comes from great art?
Just before the shutdown, Chris, I had a fantastic meeting out at Westmead with the Hospitalia, that incredible new facility for Western Sydney that's being built. And I was having discussions with them about some of the outcomes from the WHO report about arts and health, about the impact of the arts on people's well-being and how we can work better with the health sector to help deliver those amazing outcomes. I think one of the things that we'll see as we come out of this is the benefits that we've had from having had contact with the arts through the crisis and what we can do going forward, because we're not going to recover immediately. I think there's an opportunity for an arts-led recovery, both economic and socially, because I think we're all talking about these amazing digital programs. I think we're all going to be dying for the real. We're all going to be longing to see the real thing, to come together. We are social animals. Art galleries and museums in particular can play a very strong role in bringing community back together again once we get through the other side. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to do that. We can still operate social distancing, for example. The museum was open for the last couple of weeks when social distancing was beginning to come in, and we were able to do that. So I think we have an advantage that perhaps some other art forms will find it more difficult to deal with if some of the shutdown requirements continue beyond the immediate few months.
Maybe one thing we can work on going forward is this concept I've had that the ultimate contemporary form of contemporary art is not only Indigenous art, but particularly street art, public art,
Absolutely.
Street art. And
I think we're seeing this outpouring of creativity online from everybody. I believe not everybody is an artist, but everybody can be creative. And one of the things we've been doing here with our team of artist educators is develop programs for all different kinds of people from all backgrounds, from business people through to young people. And we're about to launch our program for teenagers online, for example, to help overcome social isolation. And I think these kinds of things are going to be needed when we come back out of isolation just as much as when we're all stuck in our houses looking for things to do.
I can't paint or sculpt for nothing, but my staff reckon I'm a bullshit artist. So there's a bit of art in all of us.
But it's very funny. When people come to these workshops, they sort of come in like this and they go, I'm not creative. And then by the end of it, they're actually expressing themselves in different ways, whether it's through visual arts, music, dance, whatever. I really believe that we can actually bring out creativity in everybody. So we'll have to get you to one of our workshops, Chris.
Done. Please let me loose, let my creativity out. It scares me. But I've had great time in places like Bushwick in Brooklyn, you know, down at Heel, suburbs of New York. And you think of, there's many of those that would be of equivalent across Western Sydney, yet it's been revitalised with this amazing mix of public art, street art, creative industries, and it's turned entire communities around. We're campaigning to get something like SBS relocated from a largely monocultural Artarmon to multicultural Bankstown or Parramatta or Blacktown or somewhere. But similarly, there's artistic nodes that we can drive in the West.
Yeah, there's incredible artistic energy in Western Sydney. We know that. I mean, there's amazing galleries. There are urban theatre projects, for example, Campbelltown Arts Centre, ICE in Parramatta, Penrith Regional Gallery, Casula. I could go on. We know they're all really amazing organisations, and I'm sure they're all ready to bounce back. I think we have to face the reality, though, that the financial situation is going to be very difficult. It's going to be very difficult for local government. Yep. We've just seen the Australia Council, cut through and lose a lot of support for Western Sydney organisations. I think that's a matter of great concern, that there isn't money going to those wonderful, small-scale in some cases, initiatives. And I think the financial side of it, we're going to have to be even more alert going forward that those places that are not immediately in the public eye, like we have the great benefit of being here at Circular Quay, that those other organisations that may not be so high profile are going to have as many, if not more, needs than the big companies.
And I think we're going to need your leadership more than ever. The way it's said, without a patronising sense, you managed to corral a lot of Western Sydney artistic output together, to have them coalesce, to have them work alongside. We've obviously got the great powerhouse coming, which should be a beacon of art. Hopefully things like public art in terms of architecture with big new buildings as well, like the new airport, etc., that can happen. We're campaigning for more public art to be brought into major infrastructure projects as well, that the smokestack can become a beautiful sculpture, or the Indigenous artwork along the side of motorways. There's all sorts of expression, which is a very Western Sydney thing, to be more practical about it and purposeful. And so
there are amazing opportunities, and I think you're right, with some of those big infrastructure projects, I'd like to see some of these things being turned on their head, and not always thinking about what has to be a permanent monument, but the way that you can actually activate a community, have artists working in different situations. I've mentioned health. I think that's a very important one. We're doing a project in Kingswood, for example, around making the city centre more lively, making it the perception of it less dangerous. I think artists have an enormous social role to play in all kinds of scenarios, and not just dealing with the immediate aftermath of the crisis.
Well, I think
it's our moment. I think we have to demonstrate that the arts can lead the recovery, not just be part of it, but actually lead it. On all kinds of fronts. I would like to see people coming out and spending money. Of course, we need people to come to the Rocks and buy coffee and have lunch and put money back into the economy. And I think the same for Western Sydney. We'll want to get people out to Parramatta, to Liverpool, to Penrith, and start spending again and kickstart the economy. And I think artist-led projects and arts-led projects can do that very effectively. We don't need to have major crowds, so we can overcome the whole thing about social distancing again. We can have events that are actually for smaller numbers that can be equally effective. So maybe a new model for events could be a very interesting thing to think about.
Well, I think a couple of weeks' time we're interviewing the Bard of Bankstown, Sarah Mansell from Bankstown Poetry Slam, a classic example of an artistic output reflecting and promoting its community. So Liz, and a reminder as well, the role art can play in helping us deal with crisis. Emotional crisis, importantly the role it can play in rebuilding both economic and social togetherness rather than distancing at the back end of this. Very important, and reminder to those communities, places like Bushwick, the value of properties has gone through the roof with a nice bit of low cost artistic impression. So there is money in those their paintbrushes at some stage. Thank you again. Thank you so much for the role you played, the leadership role, the collaborative role across our region. Stay safe. Everybody else shouldn't stay home eventually, get themselves back to the MCA and get your program, continue to work with the artists across the West to make it work.
We look forward to having you back.
Stay safe. Thanks, Lizanne.